a number of ways you can e-file. The IRS has fillable forms online that can be e-filed, and these are very much like the paper forms that you would fill out. And other e-filing methods are through tax softwares like TurboTax or H&R Block or Tax Slayer, Tax Act. There's a handful of them that you can buy for a specific price, and they'll help you e-file your return.
This is the Penny Forward Podcast, a show about blind people building bright futures one penny at a time. I'm Chris Peterson.
I'm Mo Carpenter.
And Liz Bottner is not able to be here this week because she is at the American Council of the Blind's D.C. Leadership Conference advocating for good stuff to happen to the blind community with our federal legislators. Today, Mo and I have Cody Bair on the podcast. Cody is a blind CPA living in Colorado, and we'll learn more about him from him. But our focus for this episode is taxes from a blind person's perspective. And an interesting take that we have this year is that we're lucky to have Cody, who is a blind accountant, to talk about taxes from a blind accountant's perspective. So, Cody, thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. I'm excited to be here and talk about something that we all have to do, whether we enjoy it as I happen to, or don't enjoy it as many of you probably will, and that's filing taxes. But first, before we jump into some of the topics that I know you want to cover today, Chris and Mo, just give a quick introduction and a little bit of background about myself. I'm a totally blind CPA. I've been blind since birth. Cause of that is Leber's congenital amaurosis, or LCA, and got my bachelor's in accounting as well as a master's in taxation, and have been practicing as a CPA for a little over 8 years now, and work for a large firm in the Denver area specializing in research and development tax credits. Also serve on the Penny Forward board, and am the treasurer of the National Federation of the Blind of Colorado. So I'm very linked into the blind community through those organizations.
Now, you said you were a CPA. Can you define more of what that means?
Yeah, so CPA stands for Certified Public Accountant. Essentially, we're authorized to sign audit reports for audits of financial statements. That's where my practice is. It's focused in tax, and more specifically the research and development tax credit. So assisting corporations and claiming tax credits, as well as documenting and substantiating those tax credits, and sometimes even defending them upon exam by the IRS.
Speaking of documentation, I think this is the most painful part of doing our tax returns for most of us. Can you give us the quick short course on the kinds of documents we need, either if we're going to do our taxes ourselves or send them to a tax preparer of some kind, and maybe where we might go to find those things?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Chris. And it's going to differ individual by individual. Some people have more difficult time gathering documents just based on the sheer volume of things that you need for your taxes. I know for me over the past few years, it's been more of a process just because I've been involved in more things and received more documents than it was maybe when I just got out of college. But the first thing that everybody is likely going to need for their taxes is their if you're employed, is a W-2, and that should always be received from your employer by the 31st of January. And in many cases, you'll get it by that second week of January from a lot of employers. And all employers actually have to mail them, but a lot of companies now provide W-2s digitally as well. So Additional documents that you might have, depending on your situation, are 1099s. And a lot of that, if you have a substantial amount of bank interest, you'll likely receive one. If you have a brokerage account, you'll also likely receive a 1099, as well as if you've performed services for somebody as an independent contractor, they may give you a 1099 as well. Other documents that you would want to have for your taxes are any sorts of receipts for any donations that you made to qualified nonprofits. This is really only applicable if you're going to itemize your deductions, as well as if you own your home, you would likely receive a 1098 from the company that holds the mortgage on your house, and that shows the amount of mortgage interest you can write off. Again, only applicable if you itemize your deductions. Another thing that's really common for taxpayers who are individuals is student loan interest. If you have student loans, again, you'll probably get a 1098 that shows the amount of interest you paid. And then other than that, just property taxes, if you own your home, is another common one that you would receive a form for that you would want to include in your tax return if you itemize your deductions.
Is there a certain way to best organize these documents to get them to our tax preparer?
A lot of times, if you engage somebody to prepare your return, they're going to send you sometimes what's called an information request. Some people call it a tax organizer. I think that name's a little more old school, and I would say it's an information request, but know that they might refer to it as an organizer. But just trying to spend some time in filling out that information request as accurately as you can and attaching all of your documents along with it. There's probably a lot of questions on that are yes or no, and putting some thought into them and making sure they're answered correctly is what's really going to help your tax preparer prepare the return correctly. Another point that I would make on getting documents to your preparer. With a lot of documents, a lot of us like to just, attach things to an email and send them. Well, if you got your W-2 and your 1099s or whatever other documents you may have, they likely have your social security number on them. Sometimes it's masked, but sometimes it's not. So with that said, emailing them probably is not the best thing to do. Probably better to upload them to a file share site of some sort and send them that way for security purposes of your information.
What are the different methods that people have of filing, and could you kind of organize them into ways we can do it ourselves and the kind of people that can help us if we just don't want to?
The first of those ways is to paper file your return. So you could pull all of the forms that you need from the IRS's website, and they're accessible PDFs, they're fillable. So you could fill them out that way and then print them, look up the correct address to mail them into, and go to the post office. If you're going to paper file, just a side note, always mail certified, because if that way mailing certified, you get receipt that it was received, and that postmark date then serves as your filing date, which is key should there ever be any questions. But an advantage of this method is that it doesn't cost anything other than, I suppose, the postage that you have to put on your forms to get them to the IRS. I would say the disadvantages of this method is that paper file takes longer for the IRS to process. But another disadvantage of this method, unless you really know what you're doing when filing a return, it's easy to make a mistake in this method. For a lot of people, I think, this just probably isn't the best method. The second way to do your returns by yourself is through e-filing, and there's a number of ways you can e-file. The IRS has fillable forms online that can be e-filed, and these are very much like the paper forms that you would fill out. The advantage here is they'd be processed faster. Still the same disadvantage, though, of you basically need to really understand what you're doing to utilize this method. And other e-filing methods are through tax softwares like TurboTax or H&R Block or Tax Slayer, Tax Act. There's a handful of them that you can buy for a specific price, and they'll help you e-file your return. I myself, even though I know how to fill out a tax return, I still use these softwares because I think they're beneficial and they make it easier and guide you through the process. And they have some internal checks to make sure that your calculations are right and that you're getting the right forms attached to the return that need to be attached to the return. And then those are pretty much all of the self filing methods. And then, as I mentioned before, you can always have somebody else do your return. There's a lot of places that will do returns for free for people with income below 64,000. Specifically VITA, which is a nationally run program that has locations across the country, and those are people that are volunteers but go through specific IRS exams to be able to prepare returns, and so you get a pretty good quality of service. And then there's H&R Block or Liberty Tax or any of Jackson Hewitt, any of those places can also file a return for you. Or if you have a more complex return, you would probably want to engage a CPA who would prepare your return for a fee, just because they have more experience and more rigorous certification requirements and a deeper technical understanding of the tax law.
And how do you spell Vita?
It is spelled VITA.
So you covered a whole bunch of things there, and I'm glad to know that all of the things you said are the things that our Taking on Taxes course have to say as well, that you can access through pennyforward.com. I'm curious to know, though, because a lot of people sort of start with, well, I either am going to file my taxes and everybody that files my taxes for me is a CPA. Like, should I go to a CPA or should I do it myself? This is a question that people ask. And so I want to clarify this for people. Is this correct? Not every tax preparer is a CPA. In fact, most are not. Is that true?
Yeah, that's very correct. If you go to a place like an H&R Block or Liberty, your taxes are likely not being prepared by a CPA. It's likely being prepared by somebody who, took some sort of basic tax exam and got, limited rights to practice before the IRS. But if you go to an accounting firm, it's likely going to be prepared by a CPA or at least supervised and reviewed by a CPA.
And then I'm curious to know, too, do you know of any blind people that are practicing as seasonal tax preparers and what the accessibility of that career path might be like?
I don't know of anybody that prepares individual taxes. That's a blind person, and what challenges they may or may not have ran into, unfortunately.
Well, if you are a blind person that's doing seasonal tax preparation and you're listening to this podcast, get a hold of us at pennyforward@pennyforward.com, because we'd love to know you and learn more about that.
Jumping off that point, you said you have prepared your own taxes and taxes for a select few individuals. How have you found the process, and what process do you use? I think you said you use TurboTax.
Yeah, so it's a good question. When I was right out of college and prepared my taxes as well as those for, a couple family members, I always paper filed them because I felt like I had, a good grip on what was going on. I knew what I was doing. It was easy enough. It didn't cost us anything to do them, and was, still relatively easy for me. As I've progressed further through my career, I feel like my tax situation is a little more complex, a little more goes into the return. And B, when the pandemic hit, I didn't want to wait 4 months to who knows how long for my refund. So I quickly pivoted and started e-filing any individual returns that I prepare. So with that, I started using TurboTax and specifically the online version. It's relatively pretty accessible. A few of the cool things that you can do with TurboTax is upload your W-2 as a PDF, and it has some like built-in, I don't know if you really want to call it AI feature, but recognition feature that pre-populates that line on the return. It also has the ability, depending on if you have brokerage accounts and who the broker is on them, as well as bank account interest, who your bank is, to connect TurboTax to those accounts, and it pulls in then your 1099s and things of that nature, eliminating a lot of data entry, which is extremely nice when preparing a return, especially if you have a lot going on. I have found sometimes in, some of the brokerage stuff, I've hit some snags with accessibility on the screen there to, hit select something or hit the next button. And what I've used for that is just, Ira with TeamViewer to connect in, and they're able to check the box that way and then move on to the next part of the return. So, I mean, I think, one of the other bigger things that, can be sometimes challenging about preparing your own return is what format those source documents that you get are in. Like, is the W-2 an accessible PDF, or your 1099s and things of that nature? I found that for whatever reason, with tax documents, as far as OCRing them, the JAWS OCR works really, the built-in feature that JAWS has works really well than a lot of the other OCRs. That's always been my go-to, and I'm able to get 95% probably of the information that I need to complete the return that way.
I think another big bonus to doing the online e-filer systems is that if you're using the same one from year to year, all your previous information is there to fall back on.
Could you talk briefly about tax deductions and tax credits and what the differences are? And if you know of any, could you talk about some of the deductions or credits that we might want to take advantage either as blind people or as people who are on lower incomes?
Obviously, the biggest one is that increased standard deduction for blind individuals. And that's something that you just need to check a box on the first page of your return, or make sure that your return for in the digital world, right? Make where sometimes you maybe, if you have a return prepared, don't interact with them face to face, so they don't see that you're a blind person. Definitely make sure they know that and check that box, because it's an extra $1,850 a standard deduction for 2023. So it raises your standard deduction to $15,700. The other one that can be beneficial to some people is what's called disability related work expenses. And I believe it's a itemized deduction, but it's just, any additional work expenses, whether it be software that you've, needed for work, et cetera, that you've had to purchase that you wouldn't have if you didn't have a disability. I mean, just based on the itemization, you really don't see too many people take advantage of that, but it is out there. And in some instances, for some people, it might make sense.
Could you talk briefly about what a deduction is and what a tax credit is?
Yeah, absolutely. So a deduction is a subtraction from your taxable income amount. So the standard deduction is $15,700. If you have income of $30,000 and you get that standard deduction, now your taxable income is $14,300. Whereas a tax credit is a dollar per dollar deduction of your tax liability. So if you owe taxes of $5,000, have a credit of $1,000, your tax liability that you owe is now $4,000. Some of the more common credits out there are the earned income credit, which is for people typically over the age of 24 with children that have an income below a certain threshold. I won't get into what that threshold is and the formula for that. It's super complex. But other credits, there's some out there for paying for college expenses such as books, tuition, things of that nature that are popular. There's a bill in the House right now that NFB has done a lot of work on to get a tax credit for accessible technology purchases. And that would be a $2,000 credit that you could take over 3 years. So if you went out and bought, say, a braille display and it cost you $3,000, you would get $2,000 in credit to use over 3 years, so approximately a little less than 700 a year to use in offsetting your tax liability for the purchase of that piece of technology. And that's been in the House for, I think, a few years now, and had a companion bill in the Senate at one point. But something that I think a lot of us would benefit from if the legislation on that were to get passed.
I think we're running short on time. So, is there anything you can think of that we didn't think to ask?
Yeah, I think two quick things. I mean, I had mentioned, the VITA program. I think that's a really good program for a lot of people with income under $64,000 because a lot of times you're getting people who are working their way to being a CPA, maybe in last year undergrad or grad school that are preparing those returns, you're getting a good quality product that, you don't have to pay for and don't have to do any work for. So I, would recommend that to anybody whose income is at a point where they can utilize those services. And second thing, a couple years ago, the IRS acquired the ability to produce notices and any other correspondence for that matter in alternative formats. And the alternative formats that they're offering are Braille, large print, and audio. What the IRS did is when they announced that they were going to make these formats available, they sent correspondences to everybody that checked the blindness standard deduction in Braille and large print to advise them on how to get these formats. But for people who haven't opted in yet or never got one of these notices, what you need to do is file Form 9000 either with your next year return, or you can file it as a standalone form. And if you do it with your return, it's something you just want to ask your service provider to do. It asks you a couple of questions, and just then you have to check which format you want to receive correspondence from the IRS in. Or if file the form standalone, you would just go to irs.gov, and then you could download a PDF that would be editable that you can fill in and then place the form in the mail. And you would have then elected into that alternative format. Also, I think on the form, there's a number to call if you're having issues filling in the PDF. And if you were to call that number, you could wait on hold and get to talk to an agent who would then be able to file the form on your behalf to elect you into that format. And, if you're wondering, like, why is this important? And what is the big reason for this? Well, I know, like, for a lot of us, print mail is not ideal, right? And with notices that you get, you sometimes have a 30 or 60-day window to contest them if you disagree. Well, if you're like me, and sometimes mail that's in print is kind of gets pushed to the bottom priority of your list, or it has to wait till you have somebody to read it to you and a couple of weeks have passed or even longer has passed, you've now lost time on your notice to contest it or to do whatever you need to before that time limit. So it's important that these are in a format that we can receive quickly and are able to read so that we can take appropriate action as necessary.
So with most of our guests, we ask at the end if there is any contact information you're interested in sharing with the listeners, and are you open to being contacted?
Probably the quickest way to contact me is through email, and my email is Cody, Cody, my middle initial J as in James, and then last name Bair, Bair, at yahoo.com. Or you can reach out to me via call or text at 970-673-6998.
Thanks for being here, Cody. This is a wealth of information, and welcome to the Penny Forward team.
Yeah, happy to be involved and look forward to working with the organization.
The Penny Forward podcast is produced by Chris Peterson and Liz Bottner with help from Mo Carpenter. Audio editing and post-production is provided by Bryn Lee at superblink.org. Text transcription of the podcast episodes is provided by Ann Verdine, and the music is composed and performed by Andre Louis. All of those people are blind. Penny Forward is a nonprofit organization founded and led by blind people. Together, we help each other navigate the complicated landscape of personal finance through education, mentoring, and mutual support. To learn more about our accessible online courses, weekly workshops, Tuesday turning pages, book brunches, monthly member meetups, early access to the Penny Forward podcast, our weekly newsletter, one-on-one financial counseling, and the opportunity to get a free subscription to the YNAB app, visit our website at www.pennyforward.com and find the Join Penny Forward link right near the top of the page. Also, Penny Forward is supported by your donations. We do not receive any government funding, and we have received a very small amount of grant funding, but I do want to acknowledge our grantors at this point. They are Wells Fargo and Thrivent Financial. If you feel like we are providing a good service, though, and you would like to help us continue doing it, please visit www.pennyforward.com/donate and set up a one-time or recurring donation today to help us continue this very important work. And other ways you can help are by spreading the word on social media, talking to your rehab agency about working with us, talking to any training centers you work with or other blindness agencies that you work with about partnering with us. And we also have some volunteer opportunities where you can help to advise our work, and all of that stuff is available at our website. Again, that is www.pennyforward.com. Now, for all of us in the Penny Forward community, I'm Chris Peterson.
I'm Mo Carpenter.
And hello to Liz Bottner, who is out doing some really important advocacy stuff. Thanks for listening, and have a great week.